Welcome to the Agile Talks. And in the same day, in the same time, we are here with you together. And in this series, in this week, we have a guest speaker, and our speaker is Lee Lambert, who is the founder of PMP, Project Management Professional Certification. And I'm excited today because that certification journey is a bit challenging journey, and we will listen its history and the future, and we will learn lots of things in today together. So let's invite Lee. Welcome, Lee.
Thank you. I'm very glad to be here. I'm looking forward to it.
Great, great. And also, are you ready? The questions, some of questions will be a bit challenging. Some of them is be a bit easy. So if you're ready, let's start our session.
Yeah, let's do. I'm ready.
Okay. Let's start with the easiest question again. This is my standard question. Who is Lee Lambert?
Lee Lambert's the old guy in project management. I've been in the business about 55 years, been involved with PMI for 45 years, and have held pretty much from a line standpoint every major responsibility up to, but not including president of an organization. And also actually worked for a while as an engineer. So I've been around the horn a few times, and it's always good to me to think about how things have changed since I started in the business in 1966. The dramatic impact that change has had on this profession, just making it a profession for one thing, has been really very interesting to watch, very insightful in terms of if a person wants to create an opportunity. Project management is an excellent place to do that. So I've done that till 84. Then we got involved in the PMP, and I became a private consultant and spent most of that time traveling pretty much around the world, talking about the PMP, talking about project management that existed at the time. So I've done a lot of travel. I've got a chance to talk to a lot of different people. I've trained about 50,000 people in 27 countries. So it's what keeps me young. I mean, I'm 76 years old, and there's none of the young bucks can keep up with me. So I think that's what keeps me young.
Oh, great. Also, you mentioned about the PMP certification. So the second question will come from PMP certification. And I don't know its history. And also, I hope our participants don't know its history. So, can you explain us the history of PMP, Project Management Professional Certification?
I can. It's sort of a convoluted history in the beginning. When we first got together, I was an engineer for the largest contract research organization in the world, and PMI wrote a letter asking if I would be willing to volunteer to head up a thing that we did with the PMP, along with four others. There were five of us in the founding group. And I saw that as an opportunity to really have an impact long term in the world of project management. So I gladly said yes. My senior level management said yes. And so we got together in 1981 and began to plan out what the PMP certification might look like. After 2.5 years, we actually went live with the program in 1984 in Philadelphia. We had completed 8 body of knowledge areas to be tested. Each body of knowledge area had 40 questions. So now you got 320 questions. We dedicated an entire day so people who wanted to take the exam could plan on having a complete day to respond to those 320 questions. You had to pass at least 6 of the body of knowledge areas, and then the other 2 you could retake. But eventually you had to pass all 8. If you missed more than 2, you had to take the entire test again. So when we laid it out for the first time, we advertised it. It was at the National Symposium. That used to be the only time you could take it, was once a year at the National Symposium. And so we had 55 people sit for the exam, and 39 of those passed the exam. Eric Jeanette, one of the founders of PMI, is PMP number one. Now, unfortunately, he's passed away, but he will always have the number one title in terms of PMP. So we started out, and I'm going to just kind of shrink it a little bit to say within the first 10 years, it wasn't that big of a hit. We had 6,018 members at the end of 10 years. That many people had passed the exam. But when you think about it, in 10 years, that's really not a lot of people. And so what happened was we, first of all, we dropped the requirement to be a PMI member. That was a very uh, difficult thing to do for a lot of people. But the fact of the matter was, a lot of people didn't want to join PMI. They just wanted to be certified. And
Hmm.
so we dropped that requirement, and then membership started to come up. People started to apply. But that wasn't the big hit. The big hit was in about 1996, 98, somewhere in that time frame. Uh, we got the endorsement of IBM, Motorola, AT&T, General Electric, and you go on and on. Every major corporation in America and embraced the PMP as their internal measure of a person's professionalism in project management. Well, you can imagine, I alone trained over 1,000 IBM people during that time frame. And all of a sudden the numbers took off. And so then we started to see the numbers increasing by 5 to 10,000 a month. And at that time, we had to expand the number of offerings. You had to work with ProSci to get them involved in a testing apparatus. And the next thing you know, we're overwhelmed. I'll be honest with you. In the first transition, we just didn't have any idea what it was going to be. Now I think we're set up to handle large quantities. I have an instance that not too long ago, maybe 6 months ago, we tested 2,000 Chinese in the same test.
Oh,
So that's the kind of numbers we started to see in the hundreds and thousands, not in the tens. And so right now, the last count, and it keeps getting different between who I ask, is 1.5 million people who hold the PMP certification. Our retention rate is not a data point that I have, and it's because we haven't really kept it, unfortunately. But we believe that the retention rate's quite high because it's a big factor in hiring these days. Most HR people, one of the first things they look at when they're doing a project management hire is this person PMP certified, and so it's maintained its position of importance in terms of the job market. In addition, of course, helping people be much more qualified to do the work. So right now we don't see it slowing down. We see that the numbers have stayed constant.
oh, great. And also, I have some questions. I take lots of note in that part. The first question is about you said 320 question. It's a bit, yeah, high amount for that question. So, what's I'm wondering about the time about that questions. Uh,
Well, at the time we had 8 body of knowledge areas, and so basically you had a set of 40 questions for each body of knowledge
mhm,
area that we dealt with. And I remember in the 1984 timeframe, and for the next 10 years, there was no PMBOK. There was no
mhm,
body of knowledge. It was not published until 1996. And so we looked at these body of knowledge areas and then built the test around that, and that sustained until we actually got a PMBOK and we're able to go back and look at what can we do to improve the test. And that's when we started to not just focus on a body of knowledge area, but focus on the PMBOK itself.
hmm. And the other question is about the journey of certification. The PMP's journey is different than from the other certifications. I got lots of certification, but the PMP was the hardest one, because I need to work on some projects in 3 years, and also I need to take some trainings, and after that lots of things I need to do to apply this certification journey. But it's not enough to apply. I need to work too much, and I need to change my mindset. I don't need to memorize something. I need to change my mindset to pass that exam. And that journey is very useful for me to understand the PMI content, to project management, to improve my project management skills. So I want to ask about, what do you think about that certification journey to complete, to experience part and training part?
Yeah, I think that based on my experience, the evolution of this kind of a process is pretty standard in terms of where we start and where we've ended up at this point. But the fact of the matter is, it's in the beginning, it was really very easy to qualify. I happened to be the person that was responsible for qualifying new applicants. And we had three little areas we looked at: professional service to the community, education, and your job requirement. That was it. And if you got 95 points, which were pretty easy to get, you could sit for the exam. And that exam took about a day. Well, that was the requirement. Now, along with that, of course, comes the requirement for experience. And basically, it's 4,500 hours of applied project management work. And
Mhm.
this was relatively easy to get for those people that had been project managers for quite some time. But for new people coming up, they couldn't even sit for the exam till they had almost 3 years of project management experience. And so we got to where the people that were taking the exam had reasonable experience, and of course were prepared to keep on learning as they got the certification. So therefore, we created this idea of PDUs. Now, it's very the same as continuing education units. Basically, it says if you're going to maintain your PMP, you have a requirement to continue to learn, to continue to improve your knowledge base, so that you are continually becoming better and better at what you do. And so we have to have 60 of those PDUs every 3 years to renew your PMP. You never, in fact, people will say they never want to take that exam again, ever. And so we don't have too many people drop because they didn't happen to get their PDUs. They understand that if they have to take the test again, it's gotten a lot more challenging. With the advent of Agile, it's become a much more comprehensive exam, and so nobody wants to take it again. So by the time you get the certification, then it's a matter of continuing education to keep that certification active.
And in that part, lots of HR professional is checking the PM. For example, I'm the attendee for, or I'm the yeah. Lots of HR people is checking the PMP status, active or passive. So I need to renew them. I need to continue to my journey, and I need to take that PDU. So I think that's a great point to continuous learning. And if I want to, so if the HR is checking that, if you are active on PMP, okay, we can hire you. If you are not active on PMP and your status is not active, maybe they can drop the candidates. So I think that active and passive is important to status to continue the journey.
Yeah, well, I think so, because as a part of the certification, qualification, and/or exam, we've
Mhm.
actually created sort of another industry,
Mhm.
a training industry, and there are over 900 ATPs now that are certified by PMI as qualified to instruct students on the concepts of project management using the talent triangle, which kind of changes frequently, it seems. But using the talent triangle to focus where are the areas that you want to maintain education on. And so out of those 900 ATPs, there's plenty of people out there that, because of their certification, are prepared to provide the education that these people need in both the preparation for the exam, but more importantly for the follow-on PDU effort, professional development units, that maintains your certification.
Hmm. That's a good point. And also, let's continue with the agile world. As you know, after agile world, lots of agile certification created. And the first question about the agile world: how does the PMP exam adapt to the agile world?
Yeah, that's a good question. That's been a big impact. The manifesto was written in 2001, but it really didn't have a big impact on our industry, at least for many years. I'd say maybe the last 8 to 10 years, it started to really have an impact. And I think PMI recognized that early on and started to evaluate what impact is that going to have on the PMP, on the body of knowledge, and they started to plan for that very early on. And as that started to change, then they incorporated some of the concepts of agile. Now, I think you mentioned this word early on, mindset. I think that people need to understand that the agile is not a methodology. It's not a system. It's really a mindset of how you want to operate and how you want to function in the project management world. Clearly, it was very, very successful, or has been, and probably still will be in the IT environment, because that's really where that short-term planning and execution pays some big dividends. So that we never knew what the end product of an IT project looked like anyway. So why try to plan it out for its entirety? Plan it in short sprints, plan it in short terms, so that you can keep. Well, that's a major difference from the predictive mold, which PMI was using all along to create the PMBOK and develop all the tools and techniques around that. So that required some pretty major changes. Now, the last PMBOK 6,
Mhm.
even had in it some evolutionary concepts of agile, had some things in the PMBOK that had not been in there before, and so we started to ease into that conversion to making the PMBOK represent agile and the predictive world. So we had to look at it from that perspective, and I think that even a lot of people keep saying, "Well, it's gonna change next year. It's gonna be heavily agile." I think if you look at the exam now, it's
Mhm.
got about a 50% agile content to it. And so
Mhm.
it's not as though we've got a major step to take. Now, I don't know that for sure because nobody gets to see the exam. I mean, that's the goals that we have to guard carefully. But the word I get is it's a roughly 50% agile, 50% predictive. And so when they changed to PMBOK 7, they made a very major change that impacted the agile and the predictive side, because they changed from a process group, which we've had 5 process groups since forever, as far as I can remember, and they changed it from a process orientation to a principle orientation. And basically, what that meant was we don't really have to follow any prescribed process flow. We
Mhm.
can do the right thing. We can do what we know and what we've learned to be the appropriate way to manage a project based on the principles. And I think I was one of the first ones to review the new PMBOK, and I walked away extremely impressed. My feedback was this is a major step forward. And I think some people are so tied into the 6 process that they haven't made that jump. They're still a little bit biased to the 6 and before uh, process orientation. So I think we've done a good job. I think the reaction to Agile was a little bit negative in the beginning because it was going to impact people who had based their life on predictive. In fact, when Agile started to really hit, people would call me and say, "Look, I just got my PMP, and now they're basically saying that Agile doesn't really have a project manager, and so what does this mean to my career?" And so I basically fed back to them that there's going to be a place for people with your experience, but the fact of the matter is, you never know what kind of projects you're going to be assigned. So you may be assigned a predictive project, and now you're prepared. An agile project, you're going to have to adapt to that. That's the continuous learning part of the process. I've had to do it. I think everybody's had to do it. That's not had a chance to grow up with it. I mean, we're not all Scott Amblers that know everything about
Mhm.
everything on project management being done through an agile world. So I think it's a learning curve thing that we have to deal with. But I think PMI has done a good job of creating this ECO, this exam content outline that can be used as a study guide to recognize what kinds of things are going to be in the exam. And I think that's going to pay a big dividend.
Okay. And also the other question is about the new PMP. The new PMP training content. It's starting with creating high performing team. So I like that because the creating high performing team and start with the high performing team is a key point to success of projects or programs or portfolios. So what do you think about the new content of PMP trainings?
Well, I think we're seeing a transition, long overdue, by the way,
Mhm.
where there's a little more emphasis. In fact, there's a lot more emphasis being on the soft skills side of the business. What we've kind of recognized, and it's something I've known for years. I have a reputation for developing high performance teams, is that people do the projects. People,
Mhm.
not systems, not software. People. And so if we don't take the time to educate people how to be more effective in the role that they play, it doesn't matter how many tools and techniques you have. If you don't know how to motivate and inspire people to use them efficiently, the end product is not going to be what you'd anticipated. So I think you're going to see more and more of that. I know in the training world, I've seen in the last 2 or 3 years a real big jump in the number of leadership kinds of programs. Emotional intelligence and high performance teams and all the things about communications have all been increased significantly. Now, that's not to say they weren't in the PMBOK
Mhm.
originally. They were, but they didn't go into much detail. I used to kind of joke about the human relations side of the PMBOK. It was kind of a joke. It just didn't have much depth to it. But now with this move to principle based, they really kind of draw out the need to be effective in this business of communication and leadership. So I think it's going to have a positive impact on the profession for sure.
Okay. And also, I want to say our participants, if you have any questions, you can share on chat, and we can transfer, try to answer that questions too. My other question is about the project managers. So lots of project managers got their certification in X content with PMI. So they are trying to manage the whole projects with in the scope and on budget and on time. But as you know, the world is changed, and they are not familiar about the new content of PMI. So as you mentioned, 50% coming from questions coming from agile world. But what do you think about that project managers? I think some project managers is affecting the whole markets, whole companies. Yeah, if you are project manager, you need to set the meetings, and you need to complete the project on time, on budget, and on time in scope. So they are trying to go with this way. So it's affecting the project manager role and the future of PMI. So what do you think about that situation?
Well, I think there's two responses to that.
Mm-hmm.
The first one is a project manager is a project manager, and I
Mm-hmm.
think that we do have to remain focused on the triple constraint.
Mm-hmm.
That's how project managers get judged. Is basically how they do on the scope, time, cost, and I think that's always going to be the case. The pressure's much more on project managers because that what I tell them, if you're not ready to accept a higher level of accountability, don't get your PMP yet, because
Mm-hmm.
that immediately raises the level of expectation. If you come into an organization with a PMP, there's a high expectation for you to be an accomplished project manager. And in fact, it's one of the reasons we've changed some of the areas of our marketing, because in the beginning we used to call it the gold standard. It was but what we found was it wasn't the gold standard, because the way our PMBOKs were written at that time, it facilitated memorization. So you didn't have to necessarily be an experienced in-depth project manager, but you had to have a good mind to memorize. And in fact, that's really what led to the PMBOK 7, because that's not a memorization concept like the 5-6 was. And so now people have to really be much more aware of what a project manager really does, and be prepared to accept the accountability that comes with that. Now, but at the same time, what I want to remind project managers, depending on the size of your organization, but project managers don't do work. They get work done through others. That's why we've seen this move to the soft skills, because a project manager has to be able to get their teams motivated, to get people enthusiastic about the work they have to do. They don't do the work, they get the work done. I tell project managers, if you're actually doing work, you're not being nearly as productive as you could be by getting work done through others. And so I think that the exam is going to prove that. I think that PMI is starting to make that point with their move towards much more soft skills in terms of emphasis on the things that project managers have to get in the way of talent. That's the so-called talent triangle. I mean, you've got to be good in all the areas, not just one or two, but all three.
Okay. And what do you think about the some companies is starting to use project leader, not project managers. What do you think about that? Uh, Project manager versus project leader. Do we need to change the title or?
Yeah, they're doing. It's kind of selfish on the company's part. It's my view, of course. Is that I think when they modify from manager to leader,
Mhm.
they basically said you're not going to have any decision making authority, but you're expected to still get things done. So basically, they're saying don't think you're going to be making a bunch of decisions, because you're not. You're the leader, not the manager. Managers make decisions, leaders lead. And I think a lot of that recognizes when you're named a manager and your big complaint is they won't let you manage, then they make a leader out of you. It's as simple as that, because they don't, the people in the higher levels of management are reluctant to let go, because they don't have confidence that the people can manage projects effectively. What we're hoping is the obtaining of a PMP certification will truly demonstrate to management, higher level management, hey, this person is really prepared to manage projects. And then we will see that name stick with project manager. But right now, there's quite a few moving to leader for that very reason, in my mind.
Okay. And I will ask some questions, but it will be a bit detailed questions. For example, project management or project manager role is a dedicated role or part-time, can be part-time role. What do you think about that part?
Well, I think what happens, this question comes up more in a portfolio that has odds and ends thrown in it. But when you talk about the idea of a dedicated project manager, that's going to be a pretty good sized project to dedicate that resource, which is expensive. Project manager are expensive. And if you're going to dedicate that project manager to one project, there will often be times when, in fact, that individual's not fully employed. In other words, not a lot going on the project right now, and so all of a sudden they see them matrixed to where they're now in charge of two projects or three projects. And the more projects, the more diffused that ability to manage will be. But I see it happening that way because they take advantage of having that resource available. And so when you're in a matrix situation, you're more than likely going to have multiple projects that you're overseeing. And unless it's a real big project, a dedicated project, of course, you don't have a problem. But even in a matrix, we have projects big enough that there's a full-time project manager. But we have to realize in that setting, oftentimes the project manager is also an individual contributor. They're also doing some of the work, some of the more critical work that needs to be done to fully utilize their time and effort. But I think the more we move to matrix, which we've been there for a while, the more we have to worry about how do we diffuse the role of a project manager where they're actually not able to do what we asked them to do in the first place.
Okay. The other question is about in one project. As you know, lots of companies, lots of project managers is starting with IT teams. So IT project manager. But in what do you think about that part? In one project, if is it possible if we work with two project managers, one of business project manager, the second of IT project manager? What do you think about that part?
Well, frankly, I've not worked actually in that environment, but I've talked to people who have.
Mhm.
It's a risky environment when you diffuse the responsibility for management to certain areas of responsibility. Then you run into the miscommunication issue that we deal with, where if we're not talking to each other, there may be many things that go down different roads because of what it is we're dealing with. So I don't think that the idea of a business manager and a project manager has been tried a lot of times. I've not heard of successes. I'm sure there have been some. I don't mean to say it can't be, but I'm not a big fan of multiple project managers.
Hmm. Okay. The other question is about project sponsorship. So, for example, in lots of company, if we put the project manager in a project, we are saying, okay, you are the project manager, you are responsible to success of this project. But they forgot to sponsorship part. What do you think about project sponsorship and project sponsor role?
Well, I think one of the reasons we have more failures than I like to admit on project is a lack of sponsor involvement. And I think that project managers have to become very good at interacting with their sponsors. We make a huge point out of it when we talk about effective project management, is that the sponsor is a stakeholder, and we have a responsibility to manage the stakeholders. So even though they're providing the funding or whatever the role of their sponsorship is, that doesn't give them the opportunity to undermine the project, to do things that make the project not successful. We've tried to handle that now with the significant increase in change management. I've said for the last year to year and a half that change management is the next big thing. I think that organizations that don't have effective, structured change management will have many more projects lose control. You really have to have a very sophisticated and somewhat rigid change control process, especially when it comes to the sponsor, because the sponsor will have ideas that they want to incorporate, but if they haven't anticipated the impact on the scope time cost relationship, then they may be asking you to implement something that's actually going to cause the project not to necessarily fail, but certainly not meet its scope, time, cost requirements. So we've got to constantly educate the sponsors about their role. They have a very significant role in project management, and we've got to make sure that they're aware of that and willing to accept it. Just as we accept our project management role, they need to accept their sponsorship role and what comes with that. I spent too many years at General Electric where they'd come back from planning programs and where they sat for a week deciding what we're going to do next year, and they never bothered talking to any project management people. And so what ended up happening is we'd have 30% more projects approved than we had resources to conduct them. So this is a case of a sponsor not being in the loop until it's too late. So we've got to improve our capability of dealing with, talking to, and managing sponsors.
Okay. And the other question is about failure of projects. What's your top two? The reason of failure of projects, reason for failure of projects.
Well, I have to default to the regular one that we always blame for everything, and that's scope creep, where the project that starts is not the project that finishes. And I think that's a function of change control, by the way. So maybe I could say the lack of change control. The other is to me, is the misassignment of resources. Because we're in a matrix, because we have to beg for resources from resource pools, if you will, and we know what the work content is. So we know, let's say we need a subject matter expert, a SME. Well, when we get down into the bargaining process, there's 3 other projects that need that same skill set. And so all of a sudden we find out instead of a SME, I get a SMO, which is a subject matter 0. But yet they don't change the schedule. They don't do anything to adjust the impact related to not getting the resource that you anticipated. So I think it's important for us to realize whenever there's a delta between the real resource and the expected resource, that has to be incorporated into the plan. Otherwise, you're going to be starting what I think I've told people from the beginning. I think most projects in America, at least, start behind schedule. I think they're already behind schedule, haven't even started yet because of this poor planning in terms of resource utilization. So those would be the 2, I think. It's 3 if I stretch out change control, but the scope creep is a direct function of change control.
Okay. And yeah, the next question is connected about the organization structure. You mentioned the matrix organization. So now lots of organization trying to change their organization structure to like Spotify model, like the other models. But I think the reason is the long live teams, stable teams. What do you think about that topic? What do you think about the long live teams and dedicated teams?
Well, first of all, if you're on a dedicated team,
Mhm.
you're on a big deal project. I mean, it's high impact on the organization. Back when I was actually running projects, that's a GE. That's all we did. Every project was a dedicated project. Now I might have 2 dedicated projects at the same time, but never more than that. But basically, what they said was, "Look, we're going to assign you a project team, and that team's going to stay with you until that project is over." So I knew what I had. I knew what I had to deal with. In the matrix organization, you're never sure because along comes another project. They take away your resource, give it to the new person, and now you're stuck with whatever's left, and that impacts your project immediately. So what we see is we start to see them fool with the organizations. We create the PMO, and now the PMO owns project managers. Well, that didn't work out everywhere, and we start to play around with the structure. What can we do organizationally to facilitate this structure more effectively? And the answer so far is we don't know. If you if you haven't had an organizational redefinition in your organization in the last year, thank God, because you're a lucky one. Organizations change at the rate, it's unbelievable how often they undergo major, not we're not talking about fourth level reorgs. We're talking
Mhm.
about major reorgs, new senior VPs, new CEOs, and every time a new CEO comes in, they want to change everything.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
so we just see that as a constant, so much energy wasted on that. We're going through this right now with PMI. We've just gotten our new CEO, president, and he's going to want to make changes. I mean, that's just natural. He's gonna be judged on his ability to get things done. Well, he's going to convert his time and energy to doing things the way he's done them. He didn't get the job because he hasn't been successful. So we're looking for change to come at PMI. That's just the way of the world right now. I don't think any organization, at least that I know of, there may be some that have settled down to where 4, 5, 6 years of the same organization, it's just not happening much anymore.
Okay. And we have question comes from our participants, Shukru. And what do you think about the project management in different countries with multicultural teams? For that, do you have suggestions? And does PMI has a plan to publish about that content?
Yeah, this happens to be near and dear to my heart. As I said, travel the world, and most of the time I'm making presentations to chapters in different countries every other day. And that's just the biggest issue that comes up because most of these foreign countries don't have a lot of project management preparation. In other words, they don't have a big cast of characters that are available to do project management. And so invariably they hire contractors and they bring people in. And one of the biggest issues I used to do, I worked in the Middle East for about 10 years and I learned that if you don't understand the culture, you're not going to be an effective project manager. I don't care who you are. I mean, I'm a nice guy. I can get along with anybody, but if I don't adapt to the culture, so what I did is I actually prepared a book. My daughter and I wrote a book that was intended for expatriates coming to the Middle East to work so that they didn't shoot their foot off the first month. And their productivity increased, their relationships increased, and I just was in Africa last month. Same situation there. If you aren't aware of the cultural implications, it came up at the summit this last week. People, this very question came up at the summit, and PMI is extremely aware of it and have now decided we have to do something about this. Either cooperate with the individual cultures to help them help us create something a person can use, not go into it blind. But I think at some point in time, if I get the nod that hey, you're going to Zimbabwe next week, I want to be able to pick something up that tells me about what the heck's going on culturally in Zimbabwe. Because otherwise, I mean, a person literally can get killed doing the wrong thing in some of these cultures. So I think it's important. I think it's an extremely good question and one that we really have to pay attention to. And in India, for example, they have their culture, but their teams have. You may have a team with 6 or 7 different cultures that they've brought in for a certain project. So if you don't effectively integrate those cultures into your project team, you're not going to be effective. So whoever asked this question is a very good question. I think that we need to pay a lot more attention to it in the world of project management.
Thank you. And thank you, Shukru, for this great question. And the other question is about to PMOs, project management offices. You mentioned the project management offices. What do you think about PMOs feature?
Uh, I was given credit by Paul Dinsmore. You probably don't know Paul, but he was a PMI fellow, passed away last year. Great guy. Lived in Rio de Janeiro, but he was from Houston, Texas. And in his book, he wrote a book with two other people about PMOs. And in his book, he credited me with the first ever PMO in 1977 at a national laboratory. But my PMO was very different than what it's morphed into. My PMO was a support organization. So people knew that if they got a project, they could come to my group. We'd help them get it planned. We'd help them do all the right things. But we really had no authority. It was a support group. Well, that's not that way anymore. There are still some support PMOs, but generally speaking, they have a lot of responsibility. They have a lot of control in terms of what goes on, what kind of systems do you use, what kind of project managers do you have assigned. And in some organizations, the project managers don't reside in a functional area. They reside in the PMO. So the PMO actually assigns the project manager. So there's quite a few, quite a few variations. But what they've become is kind of a power source. And they have a lot to do with the projects and how they're managed and how they're operated within the organization. I think that PMOs have a responsibility to make sure their people are well trained and prepared to do the job that they've been asked to do. And I don't think that always happens. And sometimes PMOs get top heavy. With too many people, too many admins, too many non-project management, profit-making kinds of organizational components. And I think we have to make sure that we keep a handle on that to where it's really focused on improving the output of project management.
Okay.
I was just at the summit, by the way. A good friend of mine, Heba is her name, is the director of the PMO for the municipality of Dubai, and she won the PMO of the Year award. And I know her personally, and she's soft spoken. She's easy to talk to, but she gets it. She understands what a PMO is supposed to do, and that's who's got to head it up. You've got to have someone who knows what a PMO is going to be responsible for.
Okay. And I have last two questions, and that questions is about your suggestions. The first question is about what's your suggestions for project managers? The second one is what's your suggestions for companies? Can you share three suggestions for each parts? Three suggestions for project
Sure.
managers. Yeah.
I think the first one is be aware of the potential associated with the job we call project manager. I don't think everybody gets it that in a way the project manager is the heart of the organization. If the projects that they've been assigned are not successful, then the company's not successful. And so there's a high level of responsibility. It's not a menial task. It's not a job in title only. There's a lot of expectations. I suggest that we start thinking early on what you want to be when you grow up. I think you need to investigate the project management profession extensively. I need to talk to people who are in it, talk to people who have left it, and understand all the implications associated with it. Educationally, you have to prepare yourself. It's a very specific role. It's not generic. It's very tailored to the environment that you're in. But on the same hand, there's software project managers, there's product project managers, facility. I mean, there's so many varieties of project management. There's something for almost every preference. I mean, I was an engineer. It was easy for me. But if I'm a plumber, might not be so easy. I may need to pick an area that I feel good about and be educated. It's just like the unions have their training capabilities. Well, we don't have that, but we have PMI, and that's the next best thing to preparing you to be a project manager. And then once you're in it, I think project managers need to want to be project managers. I don't think that any project manager who's begrudgingly been given that role will ever be in the long term successful. You have to love what you do, or at least enjoy it a lot. And so I think that that would be the third thing is once you get that job, then find how you can make yourself be enjoying it. Make yourself understand that the benefit that the products you provide success for the organization. I think those are the three things I would look at, and then continue to engage yourself and move up in terms of functional capability. Salary obviously goes up when you go up. So I think the opportunities. Now, keep in mind that PMI has estimated, along with I think Forbes or some other group that knows about these things, that there will be 20 to 25 million new project managers required in the next few years. Million. That's not hundreds or thousands. That's millions of project managers. So the opportunities are huge for someone thinking about it. Now, for the companies, wake up, companies. Wake up and decide, do you want to be successful or not? And if you do, everything you do is a project. I don't care if it's a maintenance thing. I don't care if it's a transportation. It's a project. And therefore, you need project managers. And if you don't have them, don't just borrow somebody that knows how to spell the word. Get somebody that knows how to manage that particular area. So project managers are a known quantity. And that's why we've seen a lot of work done in the HR area to prepare them to interview and recommend project managers in the hiring practice. You got to remember, most hiring agents are not project managers. And so they don't even know what kind of questions to ask oftentimes. So we have to be careful in how we hire project managers. Then the next thing is understand what contribution they can make. Have them be implied that you put them in an area where they can make the most contribution. Put them in an area that it doesn't mean that it has to be their background. I didn't have any background in nuclear engineering when I designed my first nuclear downhole testing apparatus. I just didn't. I mean, I just knew how to do that because project managers know the functionality of a project manager. So what environment it's in is not nearly as critical as the enthusiasm for doing the job. And then finally, that's really get your project managers motivated, get them excited and enthusiastic about give them opportunities. Don't give them easy stuff. Give them hard stuff that forces them to come out of their zone of comfort. I used to always say to myself, if I'm comfortable, I'm not moving forward because I want to constantly be uncomfortable. And that tells me I'm pushing the envelope. I'm moving beyond what I normally do. And that's how we grow in the profession. And so that kind of leads me to the third element for companies. Come on, company, get your development programs together, will you? I mean, make these programs add value. We're not just doing it to say, yeah, we got a development program. No, let's judge whether the development program is producing the kind of resource that your organization needs. And I think more and more you're going to see an emphasis on the project management curriculum. We see it now in universities. This just came up at the summit. Way more professors than we knew, than we even had an idea. Way more professors are teaching project management at the university level. Well, that's a major step. When I came out of the work world, there were zero. And when we started the PMP, as far as I know, there was one, and it was Western Carolina University, where the champion of the PMP process lived. And so you've got to understand this role of education is growing at an exponential rate. And if it grows in the wrong direction, it's going to take us all down. So companies, if you develop a plan for developing your professionals, make sure it's a good plan. Make sure somebody who's been there, done that, got the t-shirt, can talk to you about what it takes to put out a development plan that produces winners.
Many thanks. That was great suggestions. So our participants also, the companies and also the project managers. And many thanks, Lee. And I want to say thank you to accept my invitation and to share your knowledge and to share your experience and to create that PMP journey for us and to inspire the whole peoples about interesting about the project management.
Well,
So
I appreciate the opportunity. I think most of the participants know that I'm a LinkedIn freak. I have 30,000 connections on LinkedIn. If anything comes to mind that I didn't talk about that you want to talk about, find me on LinkedIn. I'll be happy to give you some feedback. You might not like what I say, but I'll give you some honest feedback.
great, and also your energy is very great. So it's inspiring the whole, inspiring the people. So I want to say thank you for your energy too. And next week we will be with Scott Ampler, who is the founder of Discipline Agile. And see you in next week. And thanks again, Lee. Thanks again, our participants. And see you in next week.
Hey, take care. Take care.
Bye bye.